All right, welcome everybody. My name is John Peebles. I'm the CEO here at Administrate. I'm joined with a good friend and partner, also named John Leh of Talented Learning. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us why you are so well positioned to talk on matters such as these?
Why I could possibly be well positioned. Well, hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. John, thanks for having me as we continue our discussion. I'm John Leh. I'm the CEO of Talented Learning, and we're a global independent analyst firm that studies the learning systems marketplace. So I spend my days reviewing systems, talking to customers, helping organizations buy learning systems, and have been doing that every day now for the last 11 years. And so, one of the things that we keep getting into at Talented Learning is the concept of talent management systems or training management systems, rather, TMS, and learning operations, and the topic of training operations and saving costs and avoiding risk and making ROI and all kinds of stuff. And so, can't wait to talk to you about it as we continue our discussion.
Yeah, totally. And John and Talented Learning is a place where we have sent many customers that are trying to make purchasing decisions and understanding, how to solve problems. The wealth and the breadth of knowledge and information that's there is really, really great. And we highly recommend it. And it's always super fair and super informative. And, it's fun too when we can do these things. So I think
Thanks,
one of the things around training management systems that we have started to see over the last 12 to 18 months. And for context, Administrate has been around for a long time, but we have been selling to enterprise customers for about the last 4 or 5 years. And so a lot of times prospects out in the market will say, we've never heard of you. You're just like an overnight thing. And we're like, well, yes, in your market, right? And one of the things that we have seen over the last 4 or 5 years is you go through these phases when you're entering a new market, and there's kind of very early adopters, and these folks are usually visionaries and they are doing big things and they're out there leading the pack. And so to sell to those folks and to convince them that there's a problem to be solved, and so you don't need to do any of that, right? Because they're coming to you and they're saying, we know we need a training management system and where it's going to solve all these things, and it's a nice spot to be. And we've actually talked to a number of customers and made videos with them that you can see on our website. Kevin Streeter is a guy that we've talked with a lot about this, early visionary that we're now lucky enough to have as chair of our customer advisory board and all this. And I'll get to a point in just a second, I promise. But the point here is that over the last 12 to 24 months, as the TMS market has grown and as the knowledge and mind share of the market and training leaders has increasingly understood that this is probably a gap in the organization, there is this topic of risk, or this idea of risk, that has entered into the zeitgeist. And what I mean by that is we are now having to articulate why it is so important to have a TMS, how a TMS can actually remove risk, and why making a purchasing decision to bring a TMS into your learning operation is, while it feels risky, you're actually removing risk when you do this. And so that's kind of I think the theme that we'd like to talk about a little bit today. Like, what are the risks of not having a training management system? What are the risks of bringing one in, and how to mitigate those and think about those? And what's the payoff at the end when you have this working right?
Yeah, absolutely. And risk side of the equation sometimes feels like the more boring side, but it's actually critical, of course, to the businesses. And with a TMS, you can really look at the two sides of the coin, either risk avoidance, or you can look at generation of return on investment. And we've talked about the generation of return on investment lots of times. And today we're going to get a little more tasky on the risk thing. So maybe we'll start off with you. What do you think is the number one risk that gets alleviated through the implementation of a TMS?
That's a good question. I can tell you my top 3, 4, or 5. Narrowing it down to the number one risk is a little tricky, but if I had to say,
How about two?
if I had to really pick one, we were talking to this European prospect a few years ago, and they said something. I said, well, if I had to put a gun to my head, and they're just like, stop. They're like, that is so American, right, to say that. You just so don't use that phrase in Europe. But if I had to put a gun to my head, I would say that probably the number one risk that a training management system will remove from an enterprise operation is this idea of a ever increasing coefficient of scale. And what I mean by that is, as training organizations get bigger, they get more complicated and more throughput is required of them in the form of learners. They get less efficient. And this is well supported in the literature. We've seen it anecdotally if you've ever been in a training operation. But it's this idea that in order to do more training, which organizations need as they're growing and going through change, they need more and more and more resources and people. And so with a training management system coming in with automation and standardization and all those nice things, you can remove that need to have to bring more people, things, cost, everything to scale your training operation. You're freed of the shackles of this kind of inefficiency that's going to be not only there, but increasing as you get larger and larger.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I think to pile on to that is, the end result is to have a single record of truth, or a single truth record of all your training data. Because I think what does happen in big organizations is there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions and global expansion through that, and organizations, without even trying, collect 2, 3, 10 different learning systems and different ecosystems. And you really have a couple choices at that point. One is you keep going down that path, or two, you try to centralize those learning systems. But an easier path a lot of times is to snap in a TMS that will allow all that to share data and talk and get to that single truth, no matter where you're at in the organization and what acquired. And just alleviating that risk right there from a regulatory compliance standpoint, or from just an organizational efficiency standpoint, is probably one of the bigger immediate payoff applications of avoiding risk with a TMS.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of the things that we see all the time is that when things go wrong, and people just don't think about this maybe intuitively, but when things go wrong, usually the training team is one of the first phone calls that gets made, right? There's some sort of problem. I've told this story before, but we were on site with Maersk, our customer, and they got a very urgent phone call, had to interrupt our meeting because one of their ships had run aground. And so when that happens, obviously, law enforcement and emergency services and all this stuff are getting involved, and there's tons of paperwork, but they needed to check all the training records and certifications of everybody that was on that ship and everybody that loaded that ship and all that type of thing, as within the first hour of this happening. And so training teams get put under enormous pressure. Imagine if you had to go out and dig out Excel files, or run into some paper filing cabinet somewhere, whatever. Luckily, they had Administrate as a TMS already put in place, and it was just a few minutes, and the data was all up to date, and that was that. But that is kind of one of those things where you talk about risk. We have financial services customers, and they might get sued, and they have to figure out who got trained on what products and all kinds of stuff. And this is a huge topic that is usually kind of not thought about as like a first class reason to buy something.
Yeah, audit readiness usually doesn't hit the top 5 of your things you think about every day, but it's really important. And it's not just in, Maersk, from a shipping standpoint, but it's really any industry that has, some danger to it.
Yeah.
And so, just look at the news here in the last, month with aviation travel, every one of those, immediately after every one of those accidents that's happened, they're doing exactly what you said. They're going back to the pilots, they're going back to the maintenance, they're going back to the records to be able to have to pull this for that immediate audit. And that time, it's for an emergency. But the conversely to that, then there's the regular audits that go inside, these regulated industries all the time. So having that single source and being able to eliminate the hands-on, because that's where errors always. The minute that you have to start transposing data from one spreadsheet to another, or getting humans involved at all is, especially with a consolidation of data like this, that's where all the errors come in, and where the risk starts increasing, for sure.
Yeah. The other area of risk that we see a lot, that again, I don't know if people, it's one of those areas where maybe this is just the way it's always been done, and so we don't interrogate it very heavily. But the idea of like time to competency, right, is a metric that a lot of our customers want to track for their own employees, but also for their customers, right? So if you imagine you're trying to go to market, you got a growing business, or some new market or product that you're going to launch, or just you're just growing, right? You want to make sure that the people that you hire can be competent and out there doing the jobs they need to be doing in the shortest amount of time. And you want that for a couple of reasons. One, you want them to be productive and great and have a really good career and doing all the things they need to be doing. But also, if it's not the right fit, you want to know as early as possible, right? Before. So the more we can shorten that window on an employee side, the better. And the second piece around customer training, we have a lot of customers that sell a lot of high value equipment that is, dangerous to use maybe, or at least very complicated, or could be dangerous to a patient, like in a medical device setting or whatnot. And so if the customer is taking forever to get competent on using that product, then that could be risky. You might lose the deal. They might ask for a refund or return the equipment, whatever it is. And so that time to competency is a huge risk mitigating factor that training teams can materially move the needle on businesses. And if you want to do that at scale, then you're going to need a system to do it.
Yeah, I think pile it on that concept of the big equipment. Think of like flight simulators, or really anything from a data mining operation equipment. Things that are super dangerous. The simulation environments, the training environments are wickedly expensive, and so losing any time on booking those up, or having conflicts, and not slotting the maximum amount of people to utilize those things is a terrible waste. But it's also it really kills the efficiency of these organizations. And that's just one piece of equipment. So you look at training organizations, that might have 1,000 of these pieces of equipment, and they have to be shipped out to different locations for on-site training, aligned with airline flights and aligned with instructor schedules, and doing that, accounting for days off in Europe that you don't think about. And you put all those pieces together, that creates like a ton of friction in organizations to try to do this manually, and then try to take advantage of the operational efficiency of these things. And so, just eliminating all of that risk by automating that and making that efficient, saves organizations, especially in organizations that have this high equipment, a huge amount of effort, time, and cost savings.
We got a customer that I love to visit. One, because their operation is in the city of Indianapolis, and I have family there, and I'm a big Colts fan and root for the Pacers and so forth. So I always try to
Sorry about
squeeze in
that.
a couple of games. But also, they're just a great team, and really, really on the forefront of innovating and trying to do more with less. And they were one of the beta testers for our scheduler, our AI scheduler feature that we released last year. And it's Roche Diagnostics, right? And they make all kinds of blood analyzer machines and testing equipment. And if you've ever been in a hospital or gone to a lab to get some tests run, odds are a Roche machine was part of that process. And I was like, as last fall, I was visiting them, and they were like, "Why don't you come on the normal customer tour?" And I was like, "Yes, I would love that." And so we start this tour, and they've got this huge training facility that is just this cavernous building. It looks a lot like the factory floor on Monsters Inc. If you've ever seen that film, this is just big, training facility, and the entire floor, as you walk out onto it, is just filled with all kinds of these machines. And they're not only are they a machine to analyze one part of your blood work, but they have these assembly lines that you can basically have the blood go from machine to machine to machine and do multiple tests and all of this stuff. And it's like the coolest model railroad thing. It's, all these blood vials are whizzing around and all this stuff. And they bring not only their own techs to get trained on how to tear down these machines and repair them, but also customers come in, and it's usually a multi-day or maybe a week-long training course, flying in from whatever part of the country they're in or all over the world. And they sit there and they get certified. And we had a PhD was giving us, and one of their instructors was giving us this tour and talking about biological concepts that I had never heard of. It's like, it was really, really cool. But to your point of, so in order to run a class, right, you've got to have hotel rooms booked, and you got to make sure flights have been booked, and all this stuff has to line up. And then you have to have the agendas, and you have to make sure the right instructor there. And you can't just borrow an instructor from this bit, because they won't have a PhD, they won't be certified, they won't, these are clinicians and physicians and so forth that are coming in for this training. Meals have to be ordered. And then we get down to the fake blood has to be procured, and then it has to be loaded into the vials, and then they run through the machine, and then it has to be cleaned afterwards. And so all of this stuff is an opportunity for things to go wrong. And when you've paid $1 million for your machine, and you've paid $10,000 for your week-long training, if all of a sudden something is not right, not only does it tank the perception of the quality of what you're getting, but it could have very real consequences in terms of, hey, we're not ready, or they can't get certified. And what are they going to do? They're going to spend the weekend in Indianapolis and do it on Monday or Tuesday. And so the challenges that they have on just making sure the right equipment and people are at the right places at the right time are introduced enormous risk for them. They're growing very rapidly, so they were already building a couple more training centers that are in the same area, but they just ran out of space. And there's millions and millions of dollars at stake, and it's critical to their success as an organization. And so the fact that they need a training management system should be a no-brainer, but it wasn't until a couple of years ago that they became a customer, and they've been running, this way for a long time. And so to see the people power that got freed up through that process was very satisfying on both sides for us and for them, right?
I can imagine. I think what a lot of people or professionals might not realize that a TMS would do it in an instant like this, that at Roche, as you described, is, for each one of those machines, there's a series of things that has to happen, starting 30 days before that training, starting 6 months before, that are sequential, from getting that fake blood, making sure that's it, having the machine serviced and cleaned and recalibrated. And all these things have to happen at a certain interval, leading up to one of these training sessions. And, reinventing the wheel and trying to do that every time is insanity. And so, one of the things I always think that's cool about a TMS is that they automate that process in a concept of a template, if nothing else, using the concept of offsets of days, so that you can just keep on anytime that you have to do that. You have the whole program already built, and that whole program, that template of all the things that have to happen, is not included in a single LMS in the world. And so if you don't have a TMS, then there's only one way to do that, and that's the hard way, I think. And that's where a lot of risk comes in. And, imagine trying to do that manually with 1,000 machines in there. That's crazy.
Yeah. And then what was interesting about the Roche example was, so you get those templates, and that's just for one course, and that might only be a few machines. And those offsets. So we started out years ago with the days concept of an offset, and we're just about to release hourly offsets, which is really cool, because people are like, now we want it to be even more fine grained. So, but it's like,
as soon as you release that, they're going to want minute
yes,
level control.
for sure. And but some of this stuff too, it's not just a binary like order the meal. For Roche was, and we all intuitively know this if we ever stop to think about it, but you don't think about it. And so we're going around the floor, and they're like, there's a machine over there, and they've all got these crazy, long numbers and letters that I can't understand how they remember this stuff. But they're like, yeah, that's the assembly 1 certification or something. And it's basically they're teaching their mechanics to put together the machine and diagnose specific problems. And so once the class is done, another tech has to come in and has to disassemble the machine back to the starting point for that lab or that class, and literally like pulling the wires out and maybe putting in the damaged part and all, and then reassembling it back. And then, and it is like this type of thing would have had to all been done manually. They would have had to get in tech emailed on. Now it's all being done automated. And so when you have those templates for one class, then the challenge becomes, yeah, but we're going to run 30 of these classes a day throughout this ginormous building, right? And how do you then get that Tetris puzzle of a schedule into place? That's a huge risk, because again, utilization needs to be high in order to be profitable and do all the things that they need to do to hit the growth. And so that's where that AI scheduler feature, which we've done a deep dive video on, and you definitely check it out, came into play, why they were so excited about that feature and why they got so much ROI off that, because it was time saved, but it was also risk avoidance. Yeah, it's been a thrilling story for us and for them.
Those schedulers, as we move into that topic, or your scheduler, the scheduler in general, also gives you another huge tool to avoid risk, and that's just contingency planning, of running what if scenarios of, you're running 30 of those classes at the same time, and now start adding in, different locations and different countries and different languages, and it becomes exponential. And so to be able to just run different scenarios, what if we tried this, or what if we just booked it all here for 30, and see if you could make things happen, without that. Well, you can't do that, because just to come up with your original one, takes a month locked in a room,
Yeah,
to plan that out. So you can't find one person that wants to sign up for an if then game.
totally. And one of the interesting things about the scheduling problem is, if you think about this, and somebody comes in and plunks down a schedule in front of you, maybe it's just for your family vacation, right? So I have a very organized mom. She was a teacher, and we had a big retirement celebration for my parents, and it was earlier in the year. But that schedule was published about 6 months in advance, right? And so, but if you imagine you have a schedule for something as simple as a 5-day family vacation with a couple of activities a day, right? Or it's, nothing huge. But let's say you get another version of that schedule and something has changed on it. How do you compare them? Right? That's actually kind of an interesting problem to solve that we had to come up with, because when you talk about iterating, and figuring out like, how is schedule A better than schedule B? And, my 6-year-old niece might say, well, there's more pool time on schedule B. And it's like, okay, but you have to actually think about this. And so that's one of the things that the scheduler within Administrate will do, is it will automatically generate a lot of metrics, primarily around utilization, but it'll say, here's the utilization, min max and median, where are the outliers, here's how many hours are being used, all of these types of metrics that help you actually quantify whether a schedule is better or worse, or more expensive or less expensive.
Wow.
And of course, now that we've done that, every customer is like, yeah, but we want our tailored metrics to go in. And so we'll do that too. But that again is one of those kind of risk management elements that people just tend to struggle with. We're on iteration 24. What is the difference between that and iteration 7? It's very hard to do that unless you've got some assistance from a system.
Wow. Cool stuff. Cool stuff. And if you pile on, to your example about the vacation, that's more serious than it sounds. Because, imagine if you have 1,000 trainers. And so one of the cool things I like about TMS is that they finally solved the problem of integrating in with calendar systems. Now, LMSs have their own calendar system, and that's cool, but it's reactive and it's manual. Everybody's got to put in their own vacation, if they even have that capability, put in their own kind of dates manually to do some basic conflict checking. But, if you can't plan anything in advance, from a personal standpoint, without the capability of of changing. And so by locking into like an Outlook system, for example, that reduces like a ton of risk by just the need to reschedule things and cancel things. Oh my gosh, there's no way you can miss your wedding again. So we're going to have to cancel this particular class. That all carries risks down with your students, their timing, when they're supposed to do that, depending on what your business is. So, just that part alone of being able to automate that and be sure to go with the core calendar system seems so simple, but for some reason, boy, we struggled with that as an industry for a few decades.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and we've got another deep dive video about that as well. But the idea that we can read and write from instructor calendars and from resource calendars. So if you've got meeting rooms, for example, that you might be sharing with the rest of the business, which happens all the time, we can also sync with those calendars. It's almost like we have to usually show it twice because people are so shocked that this is a thing when they see it the first time that they're like, yeah, but I mean, are you really reading off the instructor calendars? And you can then sort to the top the people that are available and even show why the other people are not available. It really blows people's minds. And it's such a powerful feature that we're really proud of. And mainly because it just makes decision-making so much easier. Imagine not having to cycle through 15 different calendars to find somebody who's available, but it's just right there. So yeah, that's probably like risk of your own employees, like, leaving because they're so frustrated because they're spending so much time on this stuff. Yeah, it's great.
I need a TMS just for my personal calendar.
Totally.
I spend way too much time on that. Hey, something else I was thinking, from a TMS standpoint, when I think of it, in addition to all the things that we talked about today, I think of it almost like the centralized brain, that hooks everything together, and it's got it's the octopus that's getting its inputs from everywhere and putting them out from everywhere. But one of the things that's a trend bigger than that in corporate the corporate world is this reduction of SaaS systems in general, and that every organization has too many of SaaS applications, parallel SaaS applications, applications that have a crossover of functionality. So one of the ways that a TMS adds super value to an organization is it makes them less dependent on any one given technology, because since it's all integrated, the ability to snap a piece out and snap another piece in and not muck up anything in your whole process is almost unheard of when you think of it the traditional way. So just that factor alone reduces the risk of one being beholden to any one vendor, or maybe there's mergers and acquisitions and things blow up. And a TMS, as you know, can connect a ton of different things, from scheduling, calendar, and CRMs, and HR, and 10 different LMSs and LRSs, and single sign-on, e-commerce applications, hotel reservations, all these different pieces. And so to be able to have that control, to be able to manage that ecosystem, something that a TMS brings that I bet you a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you went there. Now this doesn't happen overnight, but within 2 to 3 years, the kind of over under for our enterprise customers is 15 integrations. Most of them have around 15. Some will have more, some will have less. We've got a video of one of our customers, also named John, out there, who I think is up to like 26 or something at this point. Some of these are off-the-shelf integrations that you get when you purchase Administrate, but some of them are ones that him and various tech teams and so forth have built, and some of them are our partner network has built alongside them. So there's a bunch of different ways to solve this problem. But that idea of not being locked in has been really interesting to witness. ForgeRock is an example of that within our customer base. They came on board when they were a Series A startup, something like 25 people, open source software company. Training was really, really important for them and for their growth story. And over the next 10 years, they went all the way through to going public, and then they got acquired by a private equity firm and taken private again. And then they got merged with one of their biggest competitors, Ping Identity. And so that's a lot of change. And they went from using, SurveyMonkey in the days of 25, 35 people to using Qualtrics, and then of course having to swap these systems out, and then going through a merger, even more systems had to be changed. But through the whole thing, Administrate and the training management system was there, and they changed almost all of their various vendors, including their LMS a couple of times and so forth, as they grew and their needs became more and more complicated. So they were future proofing themselves from a whole bunch of heartache, and they went from being a drag on the business, a potential drag on the business, as training was so important to them, to being really a supercharger for that organization. And it's a really great story. We've got a lot of videos with Kevin as well, talking about that journey. So I'm really glad you
There's
brought
some
that up.
irony in that story, listeners, in that, when you think TMS, you think, yeah, it has to be the complicated. Even I fall into that trap a lot, that, I'm looking for the most complicated scenarios because that's where the TMS has the most value. And that's true. But the problem is, if you wait till it's all complicated, then you got to unravel that mess piece by piece.
Yeah.
When it's all grown up and tangly. But if you think about these things early, especially high growth organizations, in the software space, for example, thinking about these things when you are in that 20 to 50 employee range, and just standardizing on it right away for customer education and growth and scalability, you're doing yourself a big favor.
Yeah. And, it doesn't have to be one way or the other. We've got a bunch of stories. Siemens is one of them, Siemens Healthineers, where they had a 20-year investment in custom, homegrown, really purpose-built systems. And we came in and we linked up with those, and there are other couple of things that we helped them untangle and so forth. But you can come at it from a bunch of different directions. So don't lose heart if you're not, a Series A startup with a lot of funding and plenty of money to throw at the problem, and no legacy, because we've done the other way as well. But I think maybe bringing the whole thing to a close, to summarize, really, there's a lot of risk in not getting a training management system in place. You've got your own team is at risk. Your business could be at risk. You could be at risk of becoming that dragnet and on growth, or kind of a handbrake on the organization and what you're trying to accomplish. And if you think in terms of buckets, there's removal of risk around planning, scheduling, delivering training, but also around reporting, and getting all that data lined up that you need. And then also the technical risk around integrations. All of those things should be on your checklist to, when you're evaluating a training management system, to see how they stack up, because all of those things will be important over time.
For sure, for sure. And if you get any pushback internally, I think the one argument is, name another business function where this hasn't already been done. And you can't. Training is really the last one, and so this is the last low hanging fruit to really avoid risk and automate, and really put your organization in a position to scale.
Yeah. And, there have already been explorers that have gone before you, into the last unknown. So don't worry about that. We love to share stories like we've done a little bit today, of various case studies and ways that we've helped these organizations. Those early adopters have blazed a pretty clear path. And, it's probably time, if you're listening to this, and you haven't implemented TMS and you're a multinational enterprise, or, quick, fast growing company out there, you really need to get this problem solved. You won't believe the difference it makes. Our promise is we will remove 90% of the manual effort required to deliver classroom training in 90 days, because that's our standard implementation timeframe. So 90% in 90 days. That's what we will tell you if you want to have a conversation with us, and check out all the various resources and things that we have on the website, and give us some feedback. Let us know. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. What's your website again?
www.getadministrate.com. The company name is Administrate, not Get Administrate. We're wanting you to do something. We want you to get Administrate. Dot
That's a
com.
call to action.
That's
Some
right.
marketing. That's some marketing. You can see our stuff at independent research and analysis on training management systems and learning systems in general at talentedlearning.com. And you can also book a complimentary consultation with me if you want to talk about your situation, and I can help you think through it with a TMS. And I'm sure John can too.
That's right. I am very biased, right? So this John is very biased. The other John is not. Very, very independent and gets a great view to all the various systems out there.
So feel free to book me first, and then I'll point you in the right direction.